Back tonight on In Focus, let's continue with our coverage of Gauteng Premier David Makhura's resignation with political analyst Dr. Levy Ndou now to give us a sense of the role he's played, the man and the future of David Makhura. Dr. Ndou, good evening. Good to have you with us this evening here on In Focus. From his time coming into office 2014, I mean, a lot of people would say he's a very nice guy, always smiling, always ready to talk to you, always ready to give you a word or so. However, he has not been able to escape scandal. I mean, the first scandal that would hit him is the Life Esidimeni scandal, amongst others, where he seemed to have emerged unscathed. I mean, to what do you attribute that?
Good evening, Tavo. Good evening to the viewers at home. Of course, when Makhura came into government, a lot of people expected a lot from him because he had spent a lot of time in the ANC, and they felt when he got in there, he is the right person, and also assumed that he came at the right time. And whatever you think of his role as the Premier of Gauteng, the issue of Life Esidimeni would quickly come into your mind. And what one got impressed with is that with all the frustrations and anger that the families had and the public in general had on the government of Gauteng, Makhura was able to be bold enough to go and face South Africans and say, where we have actually done wrong, we'll take responsibility. And I think it is one of the statements that Makhura made which would make him rise above a very, very difficult situation. It takes a true leader to be able to go out and say, we are sorry, we have done wrong, and we would have done things better. And if, of course, if there is an area where you have to identify a fault in Makhura's administration, the Life Esidimeni issue, it's one that Makhura himself knows that he had not had good sleeping nights thinking about that issue.
Yeah, let's look at his maneuvering. I mean, the first thing, of course, that you say he did, immediately went to the families, immediately apologized. The other thing that is attributed to him is, of course, setting up that mediation process that was led by Judge Museneke. And yet, in all these processes, it's seemingly, I mean, we saw the resignation of the MEC for Health, we saw the resignation of a number of officials who were in that department, but he still remained as Premier. Is it because at the time he enjoyed, I suppose, the support of his party in the province?
I think apart from him being a seasoned politician, one of the characteristics that Makhura possesses is that of being able to mediate and face the challenges as they are. He is one person who is able to persuade people, who is one person who is a very good listener and is always prepared to find solutions where there is conflict, misunderstandings, and disputes. Makhura would always extend a hand to his opponents inside and outside his party. And I think that is why he has been able to spend a very, very long time as the secretary of his party, the ANC, because he was always seen as a symbol of unity, unifying all the different factions that are there in the party. And I think that is one thing that David Makhura possesses. But equally, he is one person who has made a huge challenge to most of his peers, that after realizing that his time is up in the politics of Gauteng, he, even though some would say he was pushed or there was internal pressure, we actually expected Makhura to leave this office because even before the conference, he had already indicated that he is not going to be available, but he is going to assist his party and government in the transition process, handing over at a party level and also doing the same in government. It takes a man with courage to do that. And I think some of his peers in other provinces and other spheres of government should have learned a lesson from how Makhura is actually departing from his office in the province of Gauteng.
Despite his courage, his fancy political footwork, of course, the party continued to decline in the province, quite honestly. If you look at 2019, they barely made it in there. Would you say he is the last premier in Gauteng to govern without a coalition?
Well, that could be a possibility. One other area that Makhura would also be remembered for is his open stance on the e-tolling system in Gauteng. When he was elected to be the chairperson of the ANC at the conference, he said very clearly that Gauteng is actually going to fight against the e-tolls because they assumed that the introduction of e-tolls has actually costed them a number of votes. One other area that the leadership of Makhura and his team in the province could have done better would have been, in my view, to extend a hand and become relevant to the middle class in Gauteng. What they would constantly do, specifically on matters of the e-tolls, would always be to make pronouncements after pronouncements, and we don't see the end of the e-tolls in Gauteng. He came in as the premier. He promised that he's going to ensure that e-tolls are scrapped, and today he has handed over his resignation, and we still have e-tolls. And that is one other area that Makhura should be known for, that he promised that he's going to fight against e-tolls, and indeed, he did not succeed.
He's leaving, he's resigned, and others are saying that this is also part of the fact that there is a lot of pressure within the province now. He's facing some problems within the ANC in Gauteng because his faction no longer enjoys the majority support. Does that leave the incoming premier in a precarious position? Does Panyaza Lesufi have a similar latitude that Makhura would have had when he was premier?
The challenge, Thabo, in politics is that people would love and respect you as long as you occupy a position of authority. Immediately when you no longer have that position of authority, like being the chairperson of your party, in the case of Makhura, then the writing was already on the wall, even though he was able to make pronouncements. Equally, there are those who also wanted his position of being the premier. And whether we like it or not, anybody who had the desire to become the premier was always counting the days to check on when is Makhura going to give or send his resignation letter. So, of course, there could be some form of pressure that came in. We actually only waiting for when it was going to happen, and it has now actually happened. What would then become the challenge would be for Lesufi, if he's elected to be the premier, to actually start a plan of doing better and ensuring that he improves on what Makhura has actually done. What, in my view, the new premier should do is to look on the long-term programs that have been introduced by government and make sure that they're actually being completed. Because we need to move away from the Makhura projects, the Mukonyane projects, and Mbazima projects, we need to have projects that must benefit the entire population.
Is it a poison chalice? I mean, listening to the Democratic Alliance and the list of unfulfilled promises, you've just mentioned one being the e-tolls. There are SIU reports that have not been presented. There are projects that have not been completed on energy. There are projects that have not been completed on housing. Is that going to be a burden for the incoming Premier?
The unfortunate part is that whether he's pushed or not pushed, Makhura is no longer in the picture. And what then would be the responsibility of those that are going to take over is to ensure that all the unfinished projects are actually finished, and all the matters that are supposed to be handed over for public consumption or even in the provincial legislature, they should actually be handed over, so that you don't seem to be hiding some of the information that is required by your colleagues in the legislature. Also, government should always be seen to be relevant and practice issues relating to transparency, openness, and accountability, because that is at the core of governance in South Africa. And I think Makhura should be able to have made a handover, and a proper one, to those that must take over and ensure that all the unfinished issues and projects are being handed over, and a clear program is presented to those people, so that everything else has to be completed, so that people will at the end of the day say, indeed, something was started, it is at a particular phase, it might come to an end at a particular period.
Dr. Levy Ndou, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight and giving us your thoughts and analysis there on the administration of David Makhura, as he has handed in his resignation to the Speaker at Legislature. And of course, on Thursday, it is expected that a new Premier will be elected.